Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News comes to you weekly from the SPNN studios out of St. Paul. Now, Off the Record News is a live program every week, and we're always looking for folks who have a point of view where they would like to tell the community about their point of view, or maybe they have some information that they think is important for the community, or maybe they're part of an organization that needs to get their message out. Well, this is a program that they can come to, that they can be a guest on, that they can express their opinions. Now, typically, this program also focuses on news in the community and film footage that we have from various municipal and county meetings that we have an eye to. And over the past few weeks, we've been focusing on the city of St. Paul, particularly the issue of their trash hauling. Now, tonight, then, we're going to finish up where we left off when we were reporting on the City Council of St. Paul on November 7th. They were having a meeting, and the representative from the Trash Consortium was there talking about how the rates that were being set were not going to be sufficient for the trash haulers based on various parameters in the so-called equation that he contended was no longer a valid equation in the contract by which to set the rates. The chair of the council was chastising the attorney for the Trash Consortium that he was a chauvinist and that he was treating women differently than he would treat a man and was talking down to them as women. So let's start from that clip and we'll continue our discussion.
Respectfully, Councilwoman Prince, I think that you're missing the point.
That is the second time that you have said to a woman sitting at this table that they don't understand what you're talking about, and I'm running out of patience with that.
Respectfully, Madam Chairwoman, this is not directed at any particular gender or any particular person, although
we're not misunderstanding, we're asking a question. So just clarify and don't tell us we're misunderstanding. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to parse words there a little bit. She is claiming that he said that Councilmember Prince didn't understand. And when you listen to that clip, that isn't actually what he said. His comment to Councilmember Prince was, "You are missing the point." And missing the point is different than telling somebody that they don't understand. They're two different things. Certainly you maybe could infer maybe that somebody doesn't understand if you tell them they're missing the point, but generally speaking, if you're telling somebody when you're in an argument that they are missing the point, it's that they are calling out a different point than the point that you are trying to communicate to them. So let's continue with the next clip as we then hear how the chair of the St. Paul City Council, her next response to some other comments that have been made.
To clarify, my point was this. If these rates are being calculated based on a mathematical formula, as been proposed, one should be double the other.
All right, this is highly unusual. I don't understand the approach you're taking. I don't understand what you're doing. I agree with Ms. Prince. We're not renegotiating this contract. We're setting the rates today. So can you please get to the rates specifically and the formula to my other colleagues' point about what piece of this don't we agree with? Let's run out the time and then we'll close the public hearing and hear from folks on the other side. And it does look like you have somebody who would like to also weigh in.
Now, she's the one who says, she doesn't understand. But you can tell that it's in the context of that she is mystified as to why he is taking the particular tact that he is in his argument. And it's not that she's missing the point. So you see, there really is a difference between using the terms, you're missing the point, and I don't understand. They're two different things. Well, now let's continue with our next clip.
6 minutes. So did you want to add something? Just to make sure that we don't run out of time, if you have something you'd like to add that would perhaps benefit this conversation.
So let's hustle the attorney off of the stage and get the other guy on who is waving his hand in the background, who would like to also speak and say something. Well, and as you heard, there's only 6 minutes left of the time that they have to speak. Now, I've mentioned this on a previous news program that I found it a little curious that the trash consortium, who is supposedly a partner in contract with the city of St. Paul for the collection of the residential trash, that they are not allotted a space of time at the council meeting to speak as if they are a partner. Instead, they are being timed as if they are somebody from the public who is simply presenting commentary on something that's on the council agenda. And I see it as two very different type of dynamics. Certainly, when a city council has an item on the agenda, typically the staff will have a report, and in this case, the staff did have a report. They had some things that they wanted to present, and then generally speaking, whoever it is that is a party to the transaction with the city will then get an opportunity then to supplement or to additionally present to the council. In this case, it was set up as a public hearing for the rates that were going to be set. And so when the public hearing was opened, then the trash hauler attorney had to speak during the public hearing as if they were somebody not a party to the contract. But anyway, she's called up the other individual that's with the trash consortium to see if, in her words, they can add something to the conversation. So let's hear how the conversation goes.
Thank you. I'm Greg Revering. I'm the chief manager with the St. Paul Haulers Consortium. I think one of the things that Dan's wanting to point out, and it just very clearly put, we didn't have total tonnage until September 30th. Per the contract, we would need 12 months worth of data. Okay, so that's just one point. So when we were stating we weren't ready to negotiate, we didn't even have our data. Okay, so yeah, did we drag our feet? Potentially, but we didn't have the data, and per the contract, we need that data. So again, I did submit that data.
Now, as he indicated, one critical piece of negotiating those rates is understanding how much tonnage there is or was in the past 12 months. That is part of how to understand what that projection could be for the next 12 months. And he indicated that back in September, they told the city of St. Paul that they weren't ready to negotiate. Well, if you don't have all your information and you're at the negotiation table, it's rather hard to make sure that you are indeed negotiating either in the way that is most beneficial to yourself. You need to have that information. Certainly, you could be negotiating blind and then find out that you've negotiated a deal that in essence you can't live up to if you're doing that negotiation based on assumptions or statistics for data that you don't have in your knowledge at the time. So it seems rational that they wouldn't be negotiating back then until they had those tonnages. Well, let's continue.
However, all we're asking is that we want to negotiate, not somebody or this by the city, just arbitrarily setting the rates and publishing them, because we did not have the data. September 30th is when we would have the tonnage. Okay, all we want to do is negotiate. And to Dan's point on the disposal, when you talk about your disposal rates, if you have a 35-gallon cart and you have the half gallon, or the half of that size for the every other week, there will be a very incremental mathematical difference. It doesn't reflect that. And I've challenged that in our emails sent to you as well. So again, all we're looking for is to negotiate.
Last week, we showed the portion of the presentation by the attorney from the consortium where he showed that for the smallest size trash can, that the rates for pickup every week was one rate, and that for that same size trash can, if you were to have the pickup every other week, the amount of the charges to pick up was only a difference of $3. And the point that he's making here is that if indeed there was some type of mathematical equation, it would be more of a difference between those two values. Because think about the trash that is picked up every week, and you've got the overhead of the gas, of the manpower, of the bringing it to the facility, all of these types of overhead, and then compare that if you take that same trash can and you only have to handle it, you only have to pick it up, you only have to dump it every other week, you can see where that difference would be greater from common sense than simply a $3 reduction. And this is in proportion to, like, say, a $30 charge. So that gives you an idea that that's only about a 10% difference. And certainly the amount of gas expended and the transport costs certainly would be more than and account for more than a 10% difference. Let's continue with his additional comments.
We understand that there will be a decrease in rates. Actually, one of the rates that are on the table right now currently that has not been responded to is a rate decrease. So again, all we want to do is negotiate and not have a rate that's pushed and set by the city. That's all we're asked to do, is we want to negotiate.
And I think that, and I very much appreciate your coming up to speak. I think that one of the problems we're running against is because of the delay in starting this conversation. It is November 6th. We're running out of time. We need to set these rates.
And
so I think
truly, I respect that, but September 30th is when we finally got our tonnage.
But it's November 5th, 6th.
Yep.
Okay.
September 30th, but then it's October, right? We only have that couple days after that for the haulers will actually submit that information.
As you heard, this meeting was November 6, 2019, and it was just right after the election results came out. And as you recall, one of the big issues on the ballot was whether or not the issue of the organized trash collection should stay as is, or if it should have been put on the ballot for the residents to vote up or down for having organized trash. And as you obviously can tell, the vote was to retain the organized trash arrangement in St. Paul. Now, In this particular meeting, there were a couple of the council members who were not present. So we don't know really where they stand on all of this with regard to renegotiating the contract or portions of the contract or modifying the contract, because certainly during the campaign, there were a number of issues that came up that could lend themselves to having that contract modified, such as how multi-tenant duplexes, how they are served under this contract. Does each and every one of the duplexes, like in a fourplex, have to have their own individual trash carts? Currently, that's the way it is. But doesn't it make better, efficient sense to have one trash cart, a bigger one, for one duplex or triplex, or maybe two cans, but not necessarily a trash can for every single unit in that duplex, triplex, fourplex? And so that issue didn't come up really to any great discussion at this meeting. And there are other issues that during the election came up that possibly would be ripe for amending the contract to modify. But again, that's not the point of what this council meeting was about. The point of this council meeting was to simply set the rates for the year 2020. And so we'll have to keep an eye out to see whether or not, if they revisit this issue, to see if some of the promises that they made during the campaign, if whether or not they will pick them up and look to modify some certain portions of that contract, or will they just simply push it under the carpet now that they've won their re-elections. Now, we have a couple more clips from this meeting of November 6th, so let's continue.
And I do think that that's why we have a different...
So we only had a month's worth of time to really negotiate. We really haven't had that opportunity. So
Right.
all we're asking is just sit down, let's get together and work together.
Understood. Mr. Tolbert.
Isn't that how the contract laid out how to do this?
What's that?
Isn't that how the contract laid out how to do this?
Yeah, but we can't, it wanted to be in place by September 1st. We didn't have, there's not 12 months worth of data. 1 year from now, it's another conversation. But we didn't have all the tonnage in place.
So what do you want to negotiate?
Because now we have the tonnage, and the formula that the city staff is going by right now is inaccurate. And I can point that out very clearly just from the every other week cart to the weekly cart. That's virtually, it's half. It's mathematics.
Now, he suggests that the difference between the cart, the smaller cart that's picked up every week versus the smaller cart that's picked up every other week, that the difference in the charge would be half as much. I'm not quite sure that it would be exactly half as much, but I think it would certainly be at least 40% different based upon the various factors that you would have to look into as to the overhead costs of transporting and picking up that cart every week versus every other week. That was the end of our film footage for the St. Paul trash rate report. Now, the council did indeed take a vote, and they set those new rates, and the new rates are $1 different than they were this past year, so they've gone down $1. And so, yes, that sounds like that's good news, but is there still a question about how those rates were set, whether or not, if there is an equation that they are going by in that contract, and what will this dispute turn into next year when the rates need to be set again? So these are all things that we'll have to keep our eye on, and certainly they affect everybody who's got residential trash pickup in the city of St. Paul if you're living in single-family homes or you're living in like the duplexes, triplexes, and the quads. So now there was at this meeting some discussion back and forth between the council as to, and the trash consortium as to if they were going to open up this contract for renegotiation, what was it that they wanted to renegotiate? Were they looking to renegotiate everything or just rates? Or were they looking to pick and choose? And that if the trash consortium was looking to pick and choose what they wanted to negotiate, well, then it should be even Steven, and that the city should also be able to pick and choose some things that they wanted to renegotiate, that it wasn't going to be a one-way street. And so by the time you got done, you almost had this feeling that you had two people who were in, or entities that were in a contract, who neither one of them were necessarily that happy about the contract they were in. So where will it go from here? Well, let's hope it's not going to go to district court sometime in the future. Now, coming up next, we are going to look back at some of our film footage that we had in our archives. And the reason I'm bringing it out is because now it's the second winter for this particular municipal development in Maplewood. And I think it bears in mind that it's important to look at what was promised back in 2017, and then think about whether or not those promises were upheld and how the big plan worked. Now, for those of you who don't live in Maplewood, you say, well, why does this even matter to us? Well, it does matter because it's the analysis of a project that you can actually translate from any project that might be in your community, because the same thing happens whether or not if it's in St. Paul, or it happens in Inver Grove Heights, or it happens in Stillwater, that the municipality says, we've got a project that we want to build. And they come up with a big plan. They talk about how they've done all their surveys and about what the community wants and what they think the community needs, and then how they're going to spend the money, how they're going to build it, and then in the end, whether or not is there the analysis, whether or not that project actually fulfilled the goals it was set up to meet. And sometimes your community projects, they do fulfill the goals that they were designed to meet. Other times they fall short. And yet then the analysis isn't done, so those types of mistakes aren't done over and over and over again. So that's why it is important to look back at this analysis, look and take, for example, this particular project and see how we can go through the steps and talk about what they promised, what was built, and how it works out today. So in particular, we are looking at the Wakefield Park in Maplewood. Now, Wakefield Park is in the Gladstone neighborhood. And the Gladstone neighborhood is one of the older neighborhoods of Maplewood. And it is the part of Maplewood that is relatively close, just across Larpenteur, from the east side of St. Paul. And if you are familiar where Larpenteur is and Frost and English and that kind of general area, that is very close to where Wakefield Lake is and the Wakefield Park. Now, for those of you who live on the St. Paul side of Larpenteur, in that area, you may find yourself from time to time actually going to Wakefield Park and using it because it's not all that far from where you live there in St. Paul. And the Wakefield Lake has always had this this issue with having impaired waters. At least this is an issue it's had for probably the last 40, 50 years, meaning that all the storm water draining from the streets, whether or not it's the streets of Maplewood or it's the streets of St. Paul, they all go draining directly into Wakefield Lake. So while it might be nice to look at, I don't know if you really want to be swimming in there or fishing in there. But Maplewood, on the Maplewood side, they had an ice rink there at the Wakefield Park, and they also had a warming shed. Now, they got the idea that the warming shed was not meeting the needs of the neighborhood, that they needed something bigger and better, that they needed to not only have a warming shed, but they needed to have some community space and meeting rooms. And not only did they need one skating rink, but they needed 2 skating rinks. And so they developed this whole big plan on how to rework the skating rink, tear down the warming shed, and put up the Wakefield Pavilion. Now, some people call it the Wakefield Pavilion. Sometimes it's called the Wakefield Community Center. Sometimes it's called the Wakefield Community Room. Sometimes it's just called that boondoggle of $2.5 million. Well, let's get started with our first clip, where they are talking about the blueprint plans for what they're going to design.
And then hard to see here, but on the east side we actually have a safety fence. So for folks that are on the pleasure rink, which is right next to us here, there's actually a safety fence between there to keep errant pucks from leaving the hockey rink and going into the pleasure rink area, which is highlighted right here.
So you could see from that blueprint, they've got the skating rink area, and then they've got the pleasure rink area. Last winter was the first winter that the rink was open and available for people to use it. Although it was not available for all of the winter season, only a portion of it. But the pleasure rink was not completed. So the pleasure rink wasn't ready for last winter season. But even with that in mind, you would think, well, then there must have been really a high need and a great use of the one rink, since the city of Maplewood thought it would be important to actually have 2 rinks, that since only one rink was open, that there would have been a lot of people using it. Well, in our observations of actually driving by there and trying to take account of how many people were using it once it was open, the amount of usage was actually very minimal. And since that time, we've got winter coming on, we're going to keep track of what that usage might be for this year. But what we have found in our research is that the Gladstone neighborhood is a neighborhood of many families that are, where they've got at one point there was an older number of residents in the Gladstone area because they moved in when their kids were young, but now there's been more turnover, so there's a lot of younger families with children in the community. And the demographics of the community is that it's almost close to 30% Asian. And so when it's summertime and you look at the Wakefield Park, it is very heavily used for volleyball and soccer and other outdoor activities using the park area. But when they did their survey, they didn't address what was the if you were to compare spending more money on providing facilities for volleyball or soccer versus skating, there wasn't that type of comparison done to see exactly if the neighborhood residents, if they had skating as a priority when it came to the kinds of outdoor activities that they did with their families. So let's take a look at our next clip as they continue on talking about the big plan.
Structurally, mechanically, and electrically. The floor plan, once again, as you're seeing, we have the signature space of the community room, which seats in the upper 60s in total number at tables and chairs. If it's auditorium style like this space, we could be up in the 80s. It is a very multi-function space. It has actually a gas fired fireplace. Above it, we have a large projection monitor so that we can do AV in the space. It'll be fully adapted for that. It is a space that projects out away from the rest of the building that has glass on all three sides. So we have great views, not only of the lake, but of the park. But once again, we have this protected patio that we wrap around. And you can see the arcade of columns that provides upwards of 12 feet of shade and or inclement weather protection around the entire perimeter.
When you were looking at that plan of the building itself, did you notice in the upper left-hand corner that was the area identified as the warming room? Now, previously we have shown film footage of what this looks like today, and the warming room is actually smaller than what the warming shed facility was previously. And now there are to be 2 rinks with a smaller area for a warming room. So in some ways it seems like that hasn't been matched with the level of usage that they're expecting for the number of people to be on the rinks. Now, I've also had a number of people who are in the catering business who have, since the building was built, who have looked at that area which is called the servery. And you may ask yourself, well, what is a servery exactly? A servery basically is not a kitchen. It has a refrigerator in it. There's counter space, there's electrical outlets, so you can plug in crock pots or warming plates or those types of serving implements. You can plug in the coffee pot that they have, but you really can't do much in the way of cooking there at all. And so from a point of view of a caterer that had an opportunity of looking at this, they found that the space actually was not very conducive to a caterer who was bringing their food in, because there wasn't enough space in the refrigerator to accommodate the way that you need to maintain the temperature for cold items, and that when it comes to the hot items, you have requirements for temperature you need to maintain, it was not set up properly for that to be done either. So the caterer that I talked to didn't see how this servery could be very functional for an event, unless, of course, everybody who was coming to an event and having an event at this community room was simply using crock pots. That certainly crock pots would all work fine, but that was the extent of it. Now, we have also shown on these programs our film footage of a council retreat that was held in that room, and one of the designs that they put into this community room was to have this high vaulted ceiling, which is beautiful. I mean, the looks of it, it's beautiful. The look out over the lake and with the glass and everything, it's a very beautiful room. and you think, wow, this is great, except for when somebody starts to speak to your group, or that you have a number of people in that room all talking at one time. The acoustics is very poor. So if everybody was quiet during your meeting and there was no other extraneous noise, you probably could hear that person who was trying to communicate to everybody at the meeting. However, if there's any extraneous noise, people are talking over each other or having separate side conversations, it makes it very hard for hearing anything in that room. Let's take a look at our next clip.
The other signature space is at the upper left, which is a warming space for the winter time for the hockey rink, and it's located so that we have direct visual access and direct connection for people, skaters, to come in and warm. But the other 9 months of the year, that can be used for meetings, it can be used for small arts programs and things like that. So a very flexible space. Beyond that, we have restroom facilities that serve the inside. We have a unisex fixture that serves the exterior. But we've also set the building up with electronic access so that the building lobby can be kept open during the day, allowing access to the restrooms but no other spaces. So it's a very sophisticated control system.
Now this sounds well and good, that there's going to be that outdoor, an outside door that is open to the restroom. So if you're outside and you need the restroom but you can't get in the building, you can still get into the restroom. However, we have folks we know in the neighborhood who have been monitoring this, and they report that that door is locked. So even if you go there and let's say you're at the ice rink and you put your skates on in your car and then got out and walked around to get to the entrance to the skating rink, that more often than not, that door to the restroom is locked. And so you can't use the restroom if you wish and the building is locked. So that, of course, is something that is a broken promise. Now, as you heard, they indicate that they were going to have it so that it was could be electronically controlled. Well, that's great, but you need to have somebody who is controlling the electronic control that is remotely opening or unlocking that door so people can use the restroom. Now, he indicated when he was talking about the warming area about how the windows are facing the skating rinks so that people who are in the warming area, that if, like, say, their parents or other people with skaters, that they can stay in the warming room and watch the rinks and see the skaters. Now that sounds good on paper, but here is the logistics of how that worked out after everything was designed. If you recall looking at that blueprint, the big rink, the main rink, is right north of the building and the warming area. Well, the rink has very high walls to it. So if you're looking out of those windows of that warming room, the walls of the rink obstruct much of your vision of being able to see who's on the rink skating. And if you recall from that site plan that we showed, it showed that the pleasure rink was then even going to be further over to the east of the big rink, which again, the angle of trying to see over in that direction, again, is very difficult. So there's not really the type of visibility that I think that they anticipated or they expected. They thought that they had been talking about. The other thing that we have noticed, and I talked to one of the city staff about, is that when you come out of the door of that pavilion, and let's say you have your skates on and you're going to go to the skating rink, the door to get into the opening, to get into that skating rink, isn't right across the way from the door of the pavilion. Instead, the opening to get into the skating rink is all the way around over on the side of the rink, the long side of it, some distance from the door. So that means then that people, once they've got their skates on, when they put them on in that warming room, they then have to go and walk clear around a quarter of the perimeter of the skating rink in order to get to the opening to get onto the skating rink. And I asked the staff person about this design and why the rink wasn't actually positioned a little bit differently in order to match up the door with the opening a little better. And they just basically said, well, this is the way we did it. What kind of an answer is that? But if in your community, if they're looking to put in a skating rink, that's probably an important thing to build into the concept is where is the opening to the rink going to be in relation to where the skaters are coming from.
Just provides a lot more use throughout the day. The other spaces we have are storage and mechanical, and then we have a large servery. It's not a food cooking space, but it's a space that people can use for catering. It can also be used for large potluck functions to serve people in the community room. So, and when you rent that space or you're utilizing that space, you have access to that as well as the patio space.
So this is where he puts it in there that when you rent the community space, then you're able to use the servery, you're able to use the patio space when you rent the space. So while this is a community room, this is not a free community room. And this is something that we have discussed on these programs before in the past, that the competitors that Maplewood has with this building and this community room and the rental of it, the competitors are the YMCA and all of their space that they have for rent just down the way at the YMCA Community Center. That used to be the Maplewood Community Center, but now the YMCA controls that. The YMCA is renting those rooms. The YMCA is collecting those revenues. Maplewood doesn't have that as a community resource any longer in order to rent out rooms to the residents of Maplewood. The YMCA has that building. The other competitor to Maplewood in this arena, of course, is Ramsey County, because Ramsey County, they have outdoor pavilions. While they are not enclosed that you wouldn't be using necessarily in the winter time, in the summertime, those summer pavilions are very nice. They have electrical outlets. You can have your crock pot parties there, and they are very reasonable. So there again is one of the competitors that Maplewood has in this arena. And then of course there's also the churches in the neighborhood where they have community space, that they have more than enough space, and they open that up to members of the community, not just their members, but also other organizations. And so you see there is a lot of space to be had in that area. Now with Maplewood, it would be, I do not have the statistics as to how many times it's been rented since its opened, but I know certainly Maplewood has had a number of events there. And again, the acoustics are not that good. And if you're planning on having many people together, well, you may decide that you want to be somewhere else because of the acoustics. If you're just having an event and a barbecue that you're using the patio outside, well, maybe it would be a wonderful place because then you're right by the lake. But that's the decision that people have to make when they're looking at this space, and it's not necessarily the cheapest space in the neighborhood. Let's continue with our next film footage.
It's really easy to forget, where did this come from? This park building wasn't the idea of the city council. The park building came as a result of our master park plan that we put together with our citizens. Was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I believe it was the first year that I was on the council. And the master park plan was put together over a very lengthy period of time. I know when the mayor and I started on the council, the park plan, it seemed like it took us an entire year, where we surveyed our citizens. We had all of those meetings where we asked citizens, what do you want for our parks? Because our parks are really important. And there were two things that I remember that came out of that master park plan, that whole process that we did. One was, we need to have a park building because we don't have that. And a lot of people brought up North St. Paul has one, Little Canada has one, Oakdale has one, and we didn't have one. And the other thing that came out of the master park plan is that we want connectivity. We want pathways, walkways, things that go together. And so now, what is it, 3 years? I mean, someone correct. It's been so much fun on the council, I've forgotten if it's 3 years or was it 4 years ago. But now, moving forward, this is where we are. But this is driven by what our citizens told us they wanted. And we even talked about, how are we going to fund it? Are we going to do a referendum? Citizens didn't want to do a referendum, but they made it absolutely clear, we want a park building. And so that's really the genesis of this. It wasn't something that we came up with. It was something that this has really been driven by our citizens. So I want to make that point absolutely clear, because I think because of the timing, because this was the direction from the citizens 3 years ago on the master park plan, it's taken us this long to put all of this together to get here, that people have forgotten, where did this come from? Why are we doing this in Wakefield?
It sounds like she was getting a lot of pushback from the community as to why was the city investing $2.5 million to build this big pavilion in Wakefield Park. And so instead, she's turning it around and saying, oh, it's because the residents made us do it. Except that we covered many of those meetings where they had their outreach to the community to find out what was the highest priorities of members of the community. And what they said in those survey results is that they wanted more trails and, yes, that connectivity, but this pavilion does not address that. They did not in that survey say we need to have more skating rinks. They did not say that. But they did say we need to have restrooms at our parks. That was a top priority of people answering those surveys, to have restrooms at the parks. Well, definitely there is a restroom accessible from the outside at this park. However, as I've indicated, it is reported by residents who live around there and who have been checking that that restroom is not unlocked and not available to be used. So this promise has been broken. And while it is nice to say that people indicated on their surveys that they wanted to have a park building, this is not a park building, as she is indicating, is akin to that which is in Oakdale. I drive by the one that's in Oakdale on a fairly regular basis, and I am sure that it probably cost them less than $500,000 to build that building. It's not the Taj Mahal of the Wakefield Pavilion, and it is set up differently. And this idea of having a park building, people who are talking about wanting a park building, they want to have a building that they can use that is relatively inexpensive so that they can have their family events there, so that the kids can play at the playground, that they can be using several picnic tables, that they can plug in a few crock pots, but not that it's a big production necessarily, where you've got the big vaulted ceiling and a fake fireplace and a servery and all of these things that may look good, but in practicality was not what the people actually were saying was what they were looking for. And so you could see there where she was trying to put it into context that it was the residents that made them do it, even though it sounds like she's been getting some pushback on exactly what the big plan is at that time. And that was back in 2018. They started the plans and putting those blueprints together in 2017, as I indicated, and presented them to the Parks Commission back then. So you can see that this is the progress of this project and how it can metamorphosize from what is on a survey to then when you've got council members who want to build something that they can point to and say, we built that during my tenure as a council person. That's what we gave our community, whether they wanted it or needed it at all. So let's see, do we have another clip on this? We have one more. Let's take a look.
Separate issue that has to do with water quality at Wakefield Lake, and we are very well aware of that. But because we're doing the park plan as directed by our citizens, we're still also moving forward with the water quality issue. And just at our very last council meeting, if you want to go back and look at our last council meeting, we had a presentation, and who did that presentation? Mr. Love, do you want to explain what is going to be happening with the water quality and how we're addressing the water quality in Wakefield Park? They're separate issues. We're taking care of both of them. We're responsive to our citizens. We're building this building, and we're also going to address the water quality. Can you kind of refresh that? And that was just at our last meeting.
So now at this point in 2018, you would think that Marley Abrams then must be the mayor of Maplewood at that time. Well, she wasn't. She was just a council person. But of course, she finagled her way into getting appointed as the mayor of Maplewood after Norris Slawick left. And we all know how that debacle all worked out, and that Norris Slawick then went to the Metropolitan Council and after 10 months resigned from that position. So as a result, Maplewood is now stuck with Marley Abrams as the appointed mayor. Now, this fall, coming up in 2020, Maplewood has their municipal elections. And because we have 2 council positions that have been appointed, and we have the mayor's position that is appointed, and we have a council member who is up for re-election, Maplewood is actually going to have 4 of their 5 seats on the ballot for election this fall in 2020. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not this is going to create more challengers to the people who are on the current council, whether all of the people who are appointed on the council are going to run this time to see if they can actually win after they've been appointed for 2 years. It'll be very interesting indeed. Now, to give you an idea about what we're going to talk about in a future news program, we're going to be covering some exclusive film footage that we have from a joint meeting held by the Maplewood City Council and the Housing Economic Development Commission. And this is interesting because Maplewood City Council recently took actions at their council meeting to basically decommission the Housing and Economic Development Commission, to strip them of all of their powers that they had as it comes to redevelopment and for those development and redevelopment, and that they have stripped them of their powers, and then move those powers over to the council to act exclusively as the Economic Development Authority. And the members of the HETC Commission, they're a little puzzled as to why they were stripped of their statutory powers and just relegated now to being a group of volunteers who are to just give recommendations to the council if the council should choose to listen to them. So this meeting lasted for 3 hours. We've got 3 hours of footage, a lot of great discussion and questions that went on there. So we'll be covering that probably either on Local News Report or on another episode of the Off the Record News. Now, we also have coming up one of our programs, The Citizens Reporter, where we're going to be focusing on some of the issues in Ramsey County. Tune in then. Bye-bye. Okay. To extend an invitation out to individuals out in the community who would like to come on this program. Maybe you've got a different point of view than what I have. Please, I'd love to have you come on, because after all, public access television is the community's television. It is your forum. And we have the volunteers here who are manning the cameras, manning the booth in the back, and we have the vehicle by which we can get your information out there. So please give me a shout out. I'm on Facebook, or you can contact me by sending an email to longrie@hotmail.com. That's LONGRIE@hotmail.com. Or you can simply look me up on the internet, have a web page as well that you can look at. Now, we have on our program also opportunities for people to volunteer. So maybe you're interested in understanding how to run a camera, or you would like to help with the coverage of some of the meetings that we attend, that we film. We could use your help. So again, please give me a call, or you can contact me by sending an email to longrie@hotmail.com. That's LONGRIE@hotmail.com.